So our final class presentation is a team that did a project in the community of Mayland Heights. Some of the team members were not able to make it today, so they have prepared a video presentation for you to watch. And Barry and Jeanette are also here to field questions for you at the end of the presentation. So Mayland Heights project.
Today we're going to present our neighborhood initiative called Eyes on the Alley. Before we get into it, we'd like to
Sorry, technical issues. Just need to reload, but yeah.
Today we're going to present our neighborhood initiative called Eyes on the Alley. Before we get into it, we'd like to familiarize our audience with our project team and give some background information on the neighborhood of Mayland Heights. Our project team consists of key members and organizations, including 12 Community Safety Initiative, members of the Crossroads Community Association, members of the Calgary Police Service, University of Calgary students, and Safegrowth. Our team has been using the Safegrowth approach during the lifetime of this project. The goal of Safegrowth is to create safe and secure environments by helping neighborhoods identify their strengths and weaknesses and equipping them with tools and skills needed to remove motives and opportunities for crime. It utilizes first and second generations of crime prevention through environmental design, or CPTED, principles to grow community-driven solutions and foster safe environments. Our team has been working with Mayland Heights residents and members of the Crossroads Community Association to do just that. Mayland Heights is a residential neighborhood in the northeast quadrant of Calgary, and it was established in 1962. It is bounded entirely by major highways and arterial roads, including Barlow Trail to the east, Memorial Drive to the south, Deerfoot Trail to the west, and Trans-Canada Highway to the north. It also has rail lines passing through the neighborhood along its industrial south end. Out of two potential sites in the community, the alleyway bound by 8th Avenue Northeast to the north and McGonigal Drive Northeast to the south was chosen due to its statistical distinction and its perceived lack of connection and resident involvement with the rest of the community. The alley is quite unique from what one can find in Mayland Heights. First, the alley only has rental housing, whereas only less than half of Mayland Heights lives in rental units. Second, only a quarter of Mayland Heights are visible minorities, whereas based on field observations, the majority of residents in the alley were visible minorities. While the project site is bounded by the alley, the area of interest, which was later added to the project, extends to the surrounding area. This area of interest was chosen due to a high degree of correlation of movement and usage for the core site. A multi-residential apartment building sits directly to the east of the alley, while an affordable housing complex is directly to the west. The two developments are separated by 2 outdoor parking lots in a paved alley. We asked the residents to brainstorm and come up with a neighborhood vision for Mayland Heights. It's a general high-level outlook created by the participating residents and is an idea of what they want the community to look like in the future. The residents did not disappoint. They envisioned Mayland Heights as a safe and inclusionary space where neighbors are connected with the community and one another. Our team then got together and did some brainstorming of our own. We asked ourselves, what were some smaller goals we could prioritize to help the residents achieve their vision? We came up with a list of supporting visions that would help create safe and inclusionary communities where the residents are connected with one another. Our supporting visions include increasing resident inclusion and involvement by 50%, establishing clear programming and uses in the alley, positive relationship building between the two property owners, those are the rental apartments and the affordable housing units, placemaking initiatives, and lastly, increasing neighborhood safety. Once we established a clear vision with the community, it was time to gather a list of assets in the neighborhood to create a vision-based asset map. These are all the tools and resources in the area that could help the residents of the alley to achieve their vision. Various community assets exist within a 5-minute walk from the site: a shopping node, a daycare, churches, a school, and other community organizations such as the Cornerstone Youth Center. All of these assets have the potential to enhance resident inclusion by providing them with community resources, programs, spaces to spend time, and get to know their community. It's important to note that these assets have the potential to reach various age groups. During the research stage of this project, a total of 4 site visits were conducted during the day and night. 3 main methods were used to collect research data during this time: site visit observations, site interviews, and safety audits. Our site visits included observations on the physical state of the site over time and a public life study. We observed the site for existing conditions that could help us define its habitual state. We also did a public observation study that was conducted to understand who uses the space, when, for how long, and how. This helped clarify programming of the site and identify its dominant users and uses. Some recurring issues were identified during this process: unclear programming, unkempt rear yards, smell of weed, abundance of hiding places, and overflowing garbage. The public life study helped us understand the site even more. First, it was mainly used as a transitional space, and most people who were observed spent less than 2 minutes in the alley. The only demographic that spent over 30 minutes in the alley were families, mostly mothers and children, who were using the site as a play space. There was also lack of access control. Many people who were not from the immediate area cut through it to reach their destinations. Lastly, the children from the 2 developments did not have a proper play area. There was no seating for adults or playground objects for children. We also conducted site interviews in the form of free-flowing conversations with area residents, including residents of Osgood Apartments, the affordable housing units, and employees at the 7-Eleven. We identified the following issues brought up by interviewees. First, there was a high occurrence of vehicle theft and break-ins, with some people who were personally affected, as well as some who knew a resident in the area who was affected. Second, there was a high rental turnover, with many residents noting that they had either not been in the area for too long, usually under a month, or will be leaving soon. And lastly, there was noted a lot of crime around the 7-Eleven, especially in the alleyway behind the building. The safety audits were conducted through the mobile fulcrum application that featured a series of CPTED-related questions about the study area. Main issues that were identified through the safety audit were inconsistent lighting at night, hidden sightlines and hiding places, and the perception that the alley does not feel cared for. Having identified the extensive list of issues in the alley, our team came together to analyze these findings. Our problem analysis stage takes all the previously collected data and shows 3 types of analyses: crime, site, and the CPTED matrix. This analysis will help the project team verify and better understand underlying issues on site and help create a mitigation strategy. We created this table that shows crime statistics, including types and numbers of cases that happened in Mayland Heights neighborhood over the past 5 years. In several site interviews, residents mentioned that they either witnessed or are aware of someone who was a victim of vehicle theft and residential break-ins. This crime data has confirmed that concerns made by the residents were common. Our team was unable to find any data that tracked crime or incident locations within the neighborhood. So, we took matters in our own hands and developed a map to identify them, using a depository of news articles from the past 5 years. This map includes cases of crime, social disorder, and other cases that are likely affecting neighborhood safety. We see that for crime, the most commonly mentioned cases have to do with shooting, house break-ins, and theft. There were also some maintenance issues reported, like fire in the neighborhood and water main breaks. While conducting site analysis, previous findings from site observations, interviews, and safety audits were taken into consideration and merged together to create this opportunities and constraints map. General findings for constraints in the alley include noise, especially from high traffic on 8th Avenue, and the frequent airplanes flying directly above the site, which was approximately every 15 minutes during our site visit. We noticed unpleasant smells coming from 2 of the garbage bins in the alley during all of our site visits, and there was also a constant smell of weed in the southwest corner of the alley, originating from one of the residents. Lastly, our team did a shadow study of the area to understand and predict how people would move during winter months. It gave us insight that the majority of the pedestrian activity could potentially happen on the east side of the alley, leaving the west side vulnerable and more secluded. It also strengthened our hypothesis on the previously mentioned hiding spots between the affordable housing units. It's also worth examining how the play area is affected by the winter shadows that cover most of it around 3 p.m. Where do the children play when it's too dark or cold to go outside? This brings us to the last stage of our site analysis, the CPTED matrix. By classifying our findings into first and second generation CPTED principles, we have enhanced our understanding of issues affecting the alley and determined possible areas of improvement. For the first principle, that's access control, you see a photo of the entry point into the alley, and we can also see that the sidewalk is disconnected, creating an environment that is not pedestrian friendly. Residents were often seen walking on the vehicular path or the grass area to get home. Then we have the principle of image maintenance. In this photo, we can see the garbage dumpster along the affordable housing units. It's repeatedly overloaded by oversized appliances and furniture, which causes an unpleasant smell and creates a negative image of the alley. For the principle of natural surveillance, we have shown an example of how some street lights in the alley don't properly function. This one in particular has a burnt out light bulb. For territoriality, this photo shows the famously mentioned play space that the children constantly use. For a second generation of CPTED, we're looking at the principle of capacity. We see that there is a lack of diversity in the type of facilities on site. The alley is completely surrounded by the green space, parking lots, and residential buildings. For the principle of cohesion, residents were observed to spend a lot of time on their balconies, providing what we call eyes on the alley. This also relates to the natural surveillance from the first generation CPTED principles. For connectivity, we noticed that there is no cross-neighborhood dialogue. Residents in the buildings were not familiar with their neighborhood. Lastly, for culture, this photo shows how the alley and area of interest are lacking in a sense of place, distinctiveness, and community art and branding. Our team was able to identify the main issues of the study area. We drafted a set of strategies to help improve the safety and livability of the site. This set of strategies is also a guideline on how to achieve the neighborhood vision introduced in the beginning of this report. There are attainable strategies in the short term and others that are achievable in the long term. We created an action plan that identifies short and long-term strategies to address the issues we spoke about in the CPTED matrix. Some highlights for short-term strategies include using tactical urbanism to create temporary pedestrian walkways through the alley, installing sensor lighting and surveillance cameras to help monitor movement at night, installing signage that indicates the appropriate contact information for various maintenance tasks in the alley, regular trimming of trees to reduce hiding areas, repair of broken streetlights, and hosting community events in the alley. On the other hand, we identified some longer-term strategies that would take longer to implement, such as organizing a public art program for the alley and giving it a name, creating a community support program that addresses language and cultural barriers, implementing a neighborhood watch program in the alley, encouraging more activities in the area by installing a playground and community gardens for the residents, and lastly, repairing the fencing and maintaining the rear yards of the affordable housing units. These action items span across all 8 principles of CPTED we introduced to you earlier. The short-term action items are going to be implemented in phase 1 of the project, while the long-term items will be implemented within the second phase. Timelines are currently being created by the team to determine what the lifetime of the project will be. Most of these strategies appear feasible in both the short and long term. However, it's always good to use measurements and indicators of success to ensure the proper implementation of these strategies. Once some action items begin to be implemented, it will be important to conduct regular site visits to collect information on how the residents perceive or feel about them. It will be important to monitor the crime rates in the area to measure any changes in crime rates directly in and around the alley. Safety audits, interviews, and public observations should be conducted to see whether the conditions have changed or not. The success rate of this project will be clear once these subsequent evaluation methods show the community the degree of improvements from its previous state. In conclusion, we hope that the efforts made to complete this project will help create significant and positive changes for the residents and help the alley become a safe and inclusionary space where residents are connected with the community and one another. We would like to thank all of our project partners for taking significant time and effort to help us create this presentation and a report to follow. Thanks for listening.
Very nicely done. I'm just checking. I couldn't check the questions during the session. Sorry about that. So if there's any questions, you can just go ahead. Maybe we'll have time for a very short one or two because we are running a little behind. Sorry about that. So, any questions?
It's Greg here. Just one comment. I found the, first of all, great presentation like the other two. Terrific work, you guys. Thanks so much for that, everybody involved. I did find it very interesting that when you try to use the crime stats, that they weren't accurate enough for you to really get a good picture. So you collected your own, even though they were from media reports and whatnot. I thought that was very inventive and very creative. So well done for that. How difficult was it to collect that data and put it all together?
You mean the news report incidents?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't that difficult at all because I think Google has like a archives search engines which allows you to like go through all the news reports in the past, and then like I think like the most difficult things during the process is to find the exact locations where the incidents was happening, because like there was actually lots of news report there, but they just don't have the locations that the incidents was taking place. Yeah.
Okay, and then maybe we have one question that actually seems to relate to all three teams from Mr. Darren Krause from the media, I think. So he asks, he says many of the issues seem similar in nature, such as night lines or lighting and so on. How much of this is related to design principles at the time of community build out? Then as a follow-up question, are these newer design principles being included in new community design? So, any comments? The question is also in the chat box.
I would say for initial design, sometimes those things such as lighting get forgotten within budgetary restraints. They're the last thing to be thought about. So especially in terms of the catwalk system that we're talking about, they're just little corridors. So maybe the lighting from the houses were considered to be enough at that point. But as communities get larger and more people use them, that's when the community has to step in and say, hey, there's a use for this area and we need to allocate some funds to this. So I would say it's just a forgotten element at the first part.
Mateo, if I can weigh in on that one, in Saskatoon, when we do our designs, we actually have a CPTED review committee. And so we review all structures, developments, and facilities. Particularly city ones, we don't have a lot of pull with the private sector at the moment, but what we try and do is address some of those issues as best we can. So if you want to have, if you want to encourage community cohesiveness, for example, what kind of spaces do you need in a neighborhood concept plan to encourage that? I mean, you can, even if people wanted wanted to be cohesive and get together, if there's no space for them to do that, it just makes it really hard. So just from my experience, lighting is considered in most of the projects at the beginning, as are some others. But when you get into private sector development, where you've got a housing development, that's the struggle that we're having right now as well, Darby, is how do you ensure that the private sector thinks about some of those things. And so the way we're trying to do it currently is to make sure all of our permit development officers are trained so that they can offer that suggestion or that that change and actually use the proper terms, so that whether they like it or not, we're educating them.
I can tell you from a Canadian perspective across Canada, having been involved with the planning community in Canada for 30 years in different cities, and having done this even back in the 80s, I can tell you that a lot of Canadian municipalities either don't do this kind of design in the early design phase. Speaking directly to the question, they really don't think about this. They simply have a development proposal that goes to review, and if there's a CPTED checklist, they might check off, lighting and hedging and things like that. But that's really the worst way to do this kind of work, simply because you don't know whether lighting is the right thing for that area or not for the right area. The best way is what Elizabeth is describing, is you have a collaborative team. And so getting the residents to work together with the neighbors and the shop owners and the police as one sort of cohesive team, that's a much more progressive and effective way to do it. So, but most Canadian communities don't do anything like this.
I wouldn't mind speaking a little bit to that as well. Oh, I think my microphone's away. You can hear me okay, everyone?
Yep.
So one of the things that, I'll take your question a little further, Darren. Not only does it relate to when the communities were built out, obviously design and development and CPTED principles weren't around in the 50s, and the current day principles weren't there. So obviously, as the new communities are being built out, newer design principles are being taken effect. One of my observations, being involved in community development and work with inner city communities and communities that have been around for many decades, is that not only are the design principles changed, but then when you have something that's off kilter. So for example, roads and sidewalks, everybody has. Lighting is getting changed out, I understand, over time. So more modern lighting is coming into the communities, but things like the catwalks are a perfect example, and the alleyway that's not really an alleyway, but it's also a road. Anything that's sort of non-conformist in nature tends to be forgotten maintenance-wise, and there's zero investment or zero budget to work on better pavement in the catwalks, or putting lighting in the catwalks, etc., as an example. So I think that's kind of the, it takes it a little deeper than what you're asking, but I think that cities have to look more at sort of maintaining the stuff that they've already built, as opposed to forgetting about it, and we're not using that in the new communities, so we're not going to consider it.
Cool. Okay, thank you very much for that, and great job, Mayland Heights team.